Well, I mean, you can sort of tell from the name, a hobbyist is someone who really enjoys astrology. Typically speaking, when they sort of practice astrology, it's more like this is the section that they personally really like or they find very interesting. So if they discover asteroids, asteroids, then they discover like, I know what opposition is, or opposition. So we find like, the hobbies tend to go where the interest is being piqued in that sense. And I suppose for a professional astrologer, is typically expected to have the full slate of astrological techniques, everything from natal techniques to predictive techniques to even chart calculation from scratch, the basics at least of some kind of coaching or counseling or some form of interpretive communication skills, etc. It's a much wider range of skill sets that you would expect from a professional astrologer, generally speaking. In fact, when you think about the word pro-astrologer, tells you that they actually make their living from astrology. So when somebody is a professional astrologer, they really should not be a part-timer, and they shouldn't be, it's not something that they do on weekends. And typically speaking, if somebody makes a living from astrology, there's a certain level of skill level that you expect from such a person, and also I think the volume of work that they do. It's the same thing with say like if you talk about golfing, there's always the fellow who golfs once a week, and then there's the pro golfer who golfs for 10 hours a day. And it's the same thing with astrologers. If it's just somebody who like reads a website, once a week versus somebody who actually looks at charts and does calculations on a daily basis, the difference to the customer is really that how adept are you with the tools. And I think with the experience that comes with the various ways that techniques are actually being used. And most professional astrologers also have a full set of professional tools that they use, anything from professional software. And I think with other tools like astrologers will know what I'm talking about, like Michelson tables, the ephemeris, all sorts of things, even declination ephemeris. These are things that a hobbyist astrologer wouldn't know what to do with. And I think also professional astrologers tend to have very clear specializations. As with doctors, it's the same thing, that there are general practitioners, but you also get lots of people who specialize in, say, parent-child astrology. You get people who specialize in relationship astrology, financial astrology, so on and so forth. There's a huge industry behind professional astrology that a lot of people are not aware of. The problem with self-studying on the internet is that now internet is a huge place, and there's a lot of information to be gotten from it. And I think that's where the biggest issue is, because it's that information is easily gotten. So if you only self-study from the internet, what happens is that they have a wealth of information. So you could have 1,000 keywords for Mercury, 1,000 keywords for the 9th house, for example. But how do you put them together? How does the interpretation come together is where it's very hard to get from the internet. So commonly, especially when I teach, there are lots of my students who have sort of self-studied on the internet for years and years. But if they were to see, say, Mercury in the 9th house, they don't actually know what it means. They are able to produce a whole string of keywords, but not actually be able to interpret the chart. And in that sense, the thing with the internet also is that there's so much information that inevitably there will be contradictions. So maybe one website can say this is interpreted this way, then another website will say it's interpreted this way. It gets very confusing for a student, especially if they don't really understand the context that goes behind why a website says this and that. And not to mention the credibility. Literally anybody can post online. So it's really hard to tell whether the author of what you're writing is this the real deal, or is it just some mediocre person sort of sharing a couple of tips here and there. So in a sense, studying off the internet is also kind of difficult also because very often you don't get real life examples. So people are trying to memorize. So they look at all 12 signs and they try to memorize keywords for 12 signs or keywords for all 12 houses. So it becomes information overload that does not allow somebody to actually usefully apply it into a real life context. In general, what happens is it's actually okay to get started with no background whatsoever. As someone who has taught astrology for some number of years now, I have to confess, it's actually easier to teach someone who has no background than someone who has accumulated years of random knowledge of the internet, which frankly has to go through a long period of correction before they sort of embark on a structured way of understanding astrology. Having said that, one way to get started is actually getting started with a structured education is recommended. That right from the beginning, there are good habits. Knowing how to collect keywords, how to interpret imbalances, is not as simple as memorizing fire keywords or earth keywords, but rather to know, once you have looked at the chart, what does it really mean if somebody has 7 air planets and no fire planets, for example? I think what is missing from the internet is, okay, great, there's all this info, but what does it mean? And so a structured education is recommended. And I think students should also be prepared to invest. And I don't mean just money. I'm talking also about the time and the effort that goes into it. So to get started, I would say an easy structured course to begin with. And I think a good course should also be able to advise you on how do you keep in practice? How do you keep applying what you have learned in a useful manner, and what are the best ways to extend your education on your own, because you're not going to be in class forever. And so this is essentially how people can get started. Now, I also think that if somebody is looking to become a professional astrologer, here's what a lot of schools leave out. They have a fantastic education when it comes to learning astrological techniques, but I think a lot of people forget that a professional astrologer has to make a living out of their skill. So you can be the best astrologer in the world, but I think being able to market yourself, to communicate this like a value offering is also very important. We don't think of as an astrologer as having to be a marketer at the same time, but it is the truth. Particularly as, if you become a professional astrologer, it's very unlikely that you are going to be able to apply for a job somewhere. So almost all professional astrologers in the world are self-employed. And that also means that they have to learn to sort of get their own clients or essentially to run a business. And this is why even as I am looking at, over the years, whenever I train apprentices, I also tell them, don't come just to learn astrological techniques. In fact, I say that's just step 1. And then step 2 is actually dealing with a client to be able to understand what they're going through. It's not enough to just read the chart. It's like reading an x-ray, but we cannot solve the cancer for the client unless we know how to handle the client. And then the third section is, how do you make this a business? How do you make a living out of this? How do you sell your services? So I think that's one of the issues why learning off the internet can be really difficult, because it's usually only centered on part 1 and it doesn't have the rest. It makes it very, very hard for someone to fathom how you make a living out of doing astrology. So if you're looking to get started on your journey with astrology, what I would recommend is at Astrology, we begin with a 2-day program called the Beginner's Intro Astrology course. It's a 2-day program. It's suitable for anyone who is totally new to astrology. It is also suitable for you if you've sort of read lots of websites off the internet, but you find it very hard to sort of like synthesize it into an interpretation. So in this 2-day course, its objective is to take all these different chart components and to structure it together into an interpretation that makes sense. And then if you are going a little bit further into psychological astrology, at the second stage, psychological astrology talks about the human psyche and looking into things like insecurity, self-value, even things like the need for freedom, why people feel restricted. And this information is crucial for helping clients get through difficult situations, or coming to terms with what's happening to them in their life. And again, for those who, if you really want to go much further into your professional journey, there will be other courses available if you are looking at client handling, as well as marketing an astrological service. So if you like what you're hearing so far, and you are serious about taking your astrology journey just one step further, you'll find some links at the bottom, and go to the website. There will be a whole rundown of what the courses are about. And you know what? I'll see you in class.